You've probably experienced this. You are somewhere in your house and suddenly remember that you need to do something. Maybe grab an object, maybe reply to a message, maybe pick up something important. So you stand up and walk into another room, but the moment you cross the doorway, something strange happens. Suddenly, the idea disappears. You stop in the middle of the room and think, why did I come here? You try to remember, you force your memory, but nothing happens. The feeling is curious. It's as if your brain simply erased that information. Then sometimes you walk back to the place where you were before, and almost like magic, the memory returns. This small phenomenon happens to millions of people every single day, and for a long time it seemed like nothing more than a moment of distraction. But in reality, there is a fascinating explanation behind it. This phenomenon even has a name in cognitive psychology. It is called the doorway effect, and it reveals something very interesting about how the brain organizes memory. To understand this, we first need to understand how the brain stores short-term information. When you decide to do something, like going to another room to grab an object, that information enters a system called working memory. Working memory is like a small temporary notepad inside the brain. It holds information that you need to use within the next few seconds or minutes. But this system is extremely limited. It was not designed to store many things at the same time. In fact, studies show that working memory can hold only a few elements simultaneously. Because of this, the brain constantly has to decide what to keep and what to discard. Now, an important detail comes into play. The human brain does not organize memory only by content. It also organizes memory by environment. This means that every physical space you occupy creates a small mental context. When you are in the kitchen, for example, the brain associates that environment with certain activities, food, utensils, conversations. When you are in the bedroom, another set of associations appears: rest, clothes, personal objects. These contexts help the brain organize experiences. They function like small chapters within memory. And crossing a doorway may represent something far more significant than it seems. When you move from one environment to another, the brain interprets it as a change of context. It is almost like turning a page in a book. The brain unconsciously registers. One event ended, another one started. And when that happens, it begins to reorganize the active information. Some memories continue, others are discarded, and if the intention you had, like picking up an object, is not strongly reinforced at that moment, it can simply disappear from the focus of working memory. This does not mean the information disappeared completely. It still exists somewhere in the brain, but it left the active memory system. That is why when you return to the previous room, something interesting happens. The original context reappears, and with it, the memory returns. The brain reconnects the associations linked to that space, and suddenly you remember. This phenomenon shows that our memory is far more dependent on the environment than we imagine. In fact, the brain works much more like an association system than like a simple data storage device. It uses external cues to retrieve internal information, but there is another important factor involved in this process: attention. Working memory depends directly on attention. If you are distracted, thinking about several things at the same time, the probability of forgetting increases dramatically. Imagine the following situation. You decide to go into another room to get something, but while walking, you start thinking about another task. Or you grab your phone, or you remember something else. At that moment, your attention shifts. And when attention shifts, the brain updates the priority information. The original intention loses strength, and it may disappear. This is one of the reasons why this phenomenon happens so frequently in the modern world. We live surrounded by stimuli, notifications, conversations, multiple thoughts at the same time. Everything competes for attention, and working memory is very sensitive to this competition. But the doorway effect also reveals something even deeper about how the brain works. It shows that the brain is constantly segmenting experience into small events. Each moment of life is organized into blocks: beginning, middle, end. This organization helps the brain understand the passage of time and the sequence of experiences, and physical changes in the environment, like crossing a doorway, act as natural markers of these events. For the brain, entering a new space means starting a new chapter. This mechanism is extremely useful in most situations. It helps separate experiences, organize memories, and prevent information overload. But sometimes it also creates small, momentary memory resets, and that can feel frustrating, especially when you are trying to remember something simple. But there is an interesting discovery. Researchers found that this effect can happen even in virtual environments. In experiments using virtual reality, people walked through different rooms inside a digital environment, and when they crossed virtual doorways, they also had more difficulty remembering information. This shows that the brain does not depend only on real physical space. It responds to the concept of environmental change. The brain is constantly interpreting experience, constantly reorganizing context, and constantly updating what deserves to remain active in memory. But perhaps the most fascinating part of all this is realizing how much the brain is constantly working behind the scenes. Even when it seems like we are simply walking from one place to another, the brain is making thousands of invisible decisions. What to remember, what to forget, what to prioritize, what to ignore, and all of this happens in fractions of a second, without us even noticing. So the next time you walk into a room and forget what you were about to do, remember that it does not mean your memory is failing. In fact, it means your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do: organize experiences, separate events, and keep focus only on what appears most relevant at that moment. The human brain is not just a recorder of information, it is a dynamic system of interpretation. It decides what remains at the center of consciousness and what dissolves into the background of the mind. And sometimes all it takes to recover a memory is simply walking a few steps back to the place where the idea was born. Because for the brain, memory is not just information. Memory is context. Memory is environment. Memory is association. And understanding this reminds us of something important. Even the small moments of confusion in the mind reveal how sophisticated the human brain really is. Something as simple as crossing a doorway can completely change what is happening inside your mind. And this shows that our experience of the world is not only about what happens around us, but also about how the brain organizes every detail of that experience. And when we understand this, we begin to realize that many of the mysteries of human behavior are not failures of the mind. They are simply the brain doing its job. If you want to keep exploring the invisible mechanisms that shape thoughts, emotions, and behavior, subscribe to the Human Function channel. Here, we reveal what happens inside you before you even notice it, because understanding the brain is understanding human function itself.